Hi everyone, this is Steve Maggi. Welcome to Building the Bridge. It's my pleasure to be with Shannon McNulty today, the founder of McNulty Law Firm, an expert in trusts and estates law. Shannon, thanks for being here. Question that always comes up in estate planning. It seems like an untouchable one for us normal people who don't live in your world, but what happens if someone dies in the United States and they don't have any planning in place?
So if somebody dies in the United States and they don't have any planning in place, then the court basically, if you don't have a plan, the government has a plan for you. So there are specific rules as to if there is no will of saying who should get what, there are default rules on who gets your assets. So, for example, and it kind of depends on if you're married, if you're not married, if you have young kids. So I'm just going to go with an example that's frequent for me is that for my clients is that you have a married couple and say they have two young kids. Then half of your assets would go to your spouse, and then the other half would be divided between your two children. The assets that go to the kids, that has to be overseen by the court, basically until the children turn 18, because they're not able to manage those assets themselves. So you have a situation where you have a surviving parent and they actually don't have control over the money that's supposed to be left for the children. So it can be really burdensome for the spouse who's left behind.
How does this change? How does the equation change if we're talking about foreign nationals that are in the same boat, especially if they have assets overseas? How does that change the equation, if at all?
Yeah, it doesn't really, some of the tax issues can change, but for that like particular scenario, how those assets are divided is going to be the same. If you have assets outside of the US, in particular, if you have property, real estate outside of the US, then that is going to be determined, who gets that is going to be determined by the law in that country. So, and that's true whether you're a US citizen or you're a foreign national, whether you're here on a green card or whatnot. If you have property in another country, the inheritance of that property is going to be determined by the laws where the property is located.
Okay, and let's take this to the extreme here. The parents that come with their children to the US, they pass away in an accident, for example, or maybe it's just one parent that's coming to the US with one or more of their children, and there are no parents left. What is the importance of the planning in these scenarios?
So it's really important. It's important for any family, any parents in that situation, but it's particularly important when close family members are not in the US. So any guardian has to be appointed by a court. Where people have close family in the US, then often those people will step up and petition the court for guardianship, and that can happen pretty quickly as long as it's not contested. On the other hand, if that person, those close people who you would want to take care of your kids are not in the US, then it's much more difficult to petition for guardianship from outside of the US. So in addition to sort of just the legal hurdles of maybe working with someone who doesn't speak the language or not familiar with the legal system, is that the court requires a lot more administrative proceedings to appoint a foreign guardian than it does to appoint a US guardian. Whereas for the US guardian, it's kind of a formality. It happens quite quickly. But for a foreign guardian, the US court will require a report on the fitness of that guardian from the foreign jurisdiction. And only then, when they have that report saying that that person is fit to take care of the child, will they make that appointment of a foreign guardian. So that can take many, many months. So you're talking about US proceedings, you're talking about another jurisdiction's actions, and then coming back to the US. So it's really important to have a plan in place to make sure that there is somebody here in the US to take care of your kids. Because if you don't have that plan in place and nobody steps up to take that role, then they could end up in the foster care system.
So you can't just designate the person in a document before, in that eventuality that something happens.
Correct.
It's still up to the court. Okay. Wow,
Yes.
so complicated. Well, obviously that's why there are experts like you out there, Shannon. So if people have questions about how to prepare the best they can for these sorts of scenarios when they're coming to the US, how do they get in touch with you?
Sure. They could go to my website, which is www.mcnulty-law.com, or they could just call my office at 212-431-7526.
Great. Thanks so much, Shannon.
Thanks, Steve.